Terima pembunuh!
Widespread outrage and violence sweeping across Indonesia, leaving at least 4 people dead and hundreds injured. The unrest, which began over rising costs of living, has turned into the most serious test yet for President Prabowo Subianto. Live from Singapore, this is Inside with Haslinda Amin, where we dive deeper into the worsening conflict with crucial context and sharp analysis. ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute's Made Supriyatma would be with us to look at how the unrest could impact politics in the country. Indonesia's benchmark sliding the most since April amid those protests. We're also on watch for how Thai markets will shape up following political upheaval in the kingdom. And US-China tech rivalry in the spotlight after Alibaba touts progress in AI. A report suggests the tech firm is looking to fill China's AI chip gap. Plus, as India's Narendra Modi shores up ties with China and Russia, we're taking a deep dive into Beijing and New Delhi's bilateral reset with a former Indian ambassador to China.
I sincerely ask all Indonesian citizens to stay calm and trust the government. The government I lead, along with party leaders including those outside the government, is committed to always fighting for the people's interests. To the police and the Indonesian National Armed Forces, I order them to take the strictest actions against those who have committed acts of damage to public facilities, looting of individual homes or public places, or economic centers.
President Prabowo is moving to quell a wave of unrest in Indonesia that intensified over the weekend. Protests spread to nearly a dozen major cities, with government buildings being burned and looters reportedly targeting the homes of the finance minister and several lawmakers. Parliament has now removed hefty lawmakers' allowances, which sparked outrage for being nearly 10 times the monthly minimum wage. The death of a motorcycle taxi driver who was run over by a police vehicle during a rally also further inflamed tensions. Concerns over the political instability has sent Indonesian stocks tumbling by the most in nearly 5 months. The rupiah, however, is relatively steady as the central bank continued its intervention in the currency market. Let's get perspective on the developing story in Indonesia. Made Supriyatma is a visiting fellow at the ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute. He joins us now from Yogyakarta. Pak Made, good to have you with us. Is the country now calmer, given that President Prabowo has revoked the housing allowance for lawmakers?
First of all, thank you for having me. I think the answer is no, for certain. Today in Jogja, there's 2 big demonstrations will be held. One is in the front of local parliament, and the other is in near the Gajah Mada University, the biggest university in Indonesia. I think the president didn't address the substance of the problem that the people feel. I think I heard a lot of people, demonstrators, call this is just a gimmick. So I think basically the demand is centered around 3 things. One is the rise of inequality. If you said before that this is the perks for the legislative member is so high compared to the minimum wage. And then the second thing is the systemic corruption in the Indonesian political system, especially by the elites. And the third is about the brutality of the police and also the expansion of the military. These 3 things the presidents ignore and don't want to talk. I think the people want to see first is he replaced the head of the police, the chief police General Sigit Listio. So I think it will be continued for a while, and I don't know where it will end or when it will end.
So you're expecting a further escalation in the situation in Indonesia? I mean, some people are concerned that we might see the days of 1997, 1998. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, there's an escalation, yes, but not like in 1998, 1997 and 1998. But I think it's right now the protest is more about the elites, more about the distrust of the political system. And I think the President Prabowo didn't show good leadership in here. I think I dare to say that he failed the first test of leadership because it turns out he didn't act swiftly. He just consulted to the old people, the establishment, the political parties. Yesterday, uh, I think the people have a very high distrust to the parliament, to the DPR. And the political party has a very big role in that. And the distrust to political parties is very high. So I think the president misread all of the things that happen in the society. That's because he lived in it's a very tight bubble surrounded by his loyal supporters that he didn't get the information what really happened in the society.
How much of it, Pak Made, has to do with the promises that Prabowo made during the campaign? He talked about 8% growth. He talked about jobs. He talked about a good life. And we know that the young Indonesians were looking for the good life that they saw during these hard days, and they're expecting to see the same. And now, 1 year on, they're disappointed.
Yeah, I think it's a very ironic. A lot of people expect that by voting for him, they will get a strong leader. By voting for him, as he promised that Indonesia will be a great country. How can you be a great country if you cannot even handle your domestic security? Yeah, I think this is unprecedented that as long as my career as a political scientist watching Indonesia, that the police institution has collapsed. Yeah, in several days, we see that people are there to burn down the police headquarters, the regional here in Jogja. They burn it down, and people start attacking the police post everywhere in Indonesia. So I think the police institution is collapsed, and under his watch. So I think this is a very, very saddening because then the law and order, as the police that must have held, is vacant. Yeah, it's vacant. Yeah, nobody care about that. And also, I think it's not only Prabowo's responsibility, but for all of the Indonesian elites right now, they don't show any leadership to quell the situation, to tame the riots. So the response is very weak, very meek, and then we don't know what's going on in the future. Yeah, I think if he wants to destroy
you got to wonder, Pak Made, how much appetite there is in terms of Prabowo wanting to address low wages. I mean, he's got great spending plans. He has that $1 billion plan for free meals. He is already struggling to fund that. I mean, how does he address the issues of the people?
Yeah, I think again, for example, the free nutritious meal. A lot of people, he say that it will benefit a lot of people. It will benefit the producers, the food producers in the region. But in fact, a lot of those who got a contract is the old money, the old people, the establishment in the region. So also also at the national level. So this is only the economy for the elites. I think he misread everything. His red and white cooperatives, for example, he didn't involve people. Yeah, right now he has a very, very big cabinet, and I think it costs a lot. But he is not governed by the usual ministries channel. He created his own task force, in order to bypass all of the ministries. So there's a lot of waste actually, and people don't see that this will bring hope for the future. This will increase their welfare, for example. So there's a lot of pessimism, lack of hope for this government.
You talk about how Indonesia right now is for the elites. This is a population of 270 million people. Isn't it true as well that even the businesses are not that happy? I mean, Prabowo has talked about issuing patriot bonds, wanting companies to buy these bonds at low yields. And these are bonds that people are not really interested in, but might be forced to buy anyways.
Yes, and then it's very. I've heard about that complaint also from the business side. How can you? You have to show your nationalism by buying this kind of bonds, and the big players like Jarum and Tumble, they have to buy this kind of bonds. I think you can't do this to the market. Yeah. And then the people, I think, not very happy about this, especially in the business community. And then, everything was measured by your nationalism to the countries. And I think it's a kind of look at the other example that I have, also the palm oil. How the government confiscated the palm oil that located inside the protected forest, and then they give it to the Agridas Palma, which is the state companies which are managed all by the general. So people saw this kind of things that it is just everything is circle around Prabowo and his small circle of retired generals and the people in his own party. So this is not healthy. I think he has to change the course. He has to reshuffle the cabinet. He has to manage how to control the police and also the military, and he has to stop the expansion of the military.
The question really is, do you see him doing that, and how soon might he do that?
I don't think it's soon. This guys is Prabowo is a very firm on his belief. He's a military man, and I think from his biography, from his memoir, 3 books of his memoir, I conclude that he really wants to do what he really wants to do is a state capitalism and control command economy. That's what he said, the command economy. So everything will be centered. You see that all of these protests started from the region, started from Pati because of the taxes. This is because of his policies. He cut all the transfer to the region, by 50 trillion rupiah. It's not a big money, but it forced the government, the local government, to look for another fund. And they raise taxes, and it's create unrest in the region. And then for the next budget year, I think he will cut it again for 5-fold. So it will force the local government to find funding somewhere else. So he squeezed them and then take it over to the central government, and will bring it back to the local government by using a project. So he planned everything centrally. It doesn't work.
Right.
Indonesia has enjoyed 25 years of reformation. We have a decentralization. It works really well. Yeah, you like it or not, but the centralization is the future of Indonesia, not the centralization.
Pak Made, some of the people I talked to in Indonesia expect Prabowo to take a tougher stance from here. They say that he may deem looting and rioting as treason, and that will allow the police and the military to take really a hard stance on the looters and the people. Do you see this happening?
It started to happen, but I think it's just, again, this is the leadership. A lack of a clear command from the top. So there's a kind of hesitation for either the police or the military to crack down on the looting and the burning. I think it will not work until he shows that clear what he wants. Does he really wants to crack down on everything? Does he really want to limit the freedom of speech, for example? Yeah, as the consequences of if you have a freedom of speech, of course, a lot of people will join in, and some of them are rioters, some of them will take this opportunity. This is a very tight rope for him to walk in.
So for investors, do they wait and see? Do they pull their money out, given the history that Indonesia has when it comes to protests and riot and how violent that may turn out to be?
Yeah, this will going on for a while until we find a balance. I think what we need is a government.
What's a while, Pak Made? Are we talking about the next few days, the next few weeks, the next few months? What's a while?
I expect this will be gone in a few weeks, not really months, because people will get tired, and the government will find its food. But I think Prabowo has to address the basic and substantive issues that make this protest happen. So, as I say, that he has to address the corruption cases. He has to address the inequality. Yeah, and he has to look at his program again, and I hope he will be humbled by this protest and riots and the collapse of the police institution, because this is not good for him, and people will see him as a weak leader. Yeah. His enemies domestically and abroad will see that, well, how can we deal with this kind of guy? He's weak. He cannot handle this kind of protest. So I think right now, sadly, I would say that forget about the Indonesia has a major become a regional power, because we are not as strong as that actually.
Pak Made, as an Indonesian, what's your biggest worry? What's your biggest concern right now?
My biggest worry that this country will go without a clear directions. People really don't want to replace Prabowo, because the next in line is not really. It will bring a huge instability if the next in line will take over. I don't think that he has any capabilities to handle the situation. Yeah. So I think for Mr. Prabowo, I think I really hope that he changed the course. He make offer again his cabinet, make it smaller, make it more efficient, and lower his ambitions, lower his spending, and think more about the people.
Pak Made will continue to track developments in Indonesia. Made Supriyatma of the ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute, coming to us from Yogyakarta. Still to come, we're keeping the focus on Southeast Asian markets as investors weigh the growing political risks in both Indonesia and Thailand. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. Here's a look at how local markets are trading in Indonesia and Thailand. Not surprising, they are in the negative. Southeast Asian investors grappling with elevated political risks in both key markets after a weekend of widespread protests in Indonesia and the removal of yet another prime minister in Thailand. Let's get more on the market implications. MLive market strategist Mary Nicola is with us. I go away for 1 week and I come back to a completely different investment landscape in Southeast Asia. I mean, you can't imagine. I mean, these are among the two largest markets in Southeast Asia. sentiment will be impacted.
Well, before you left, also keep in mind that there were strong inflows into Indonesian markets in the month of August. So it had quite a good run where you saw this reversal and people coming back in. And actually, there were some green shoots coming through, whether you saw from the budget side where they weren't going to escalate, widen the budget deficit. There were some signs that things were improving, that the economy was holding up despite the tariffs. And then, of course, these political protests and the civil unrest is really going to impact sentiment. So, of course, you've got, as long as they linger, that's what's going, you're going to see a drag on whether it's the stock market or the currency, because at the end of the day, investor confidence has been shaken. And now what we saw as inflows could start seeing as outflows.
So you talked about how there were inflows that has to do with the rotation from the U.S. given the low valuations here. So that's going to take a break. But when you take a look at Indonesia, year to date, still up 11%, ain't too shabby. And plus, when you take a look at the currency, pretty stable thanks to Bank Indonesia.
It's pretty stable, but it has been an underperformer, let's keep in mind, especially with, we've seen a drag on the dollar.
It hasn't collapsed.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. But you have to keep in mind that so how much investors are, especially if you look at the bond market, foreign participation has gone down significantly. So you're not seeing as much of the volatility as, let's say, we were used to, take, for example, during the taper tantrum, where you saw IDR volatility really high. But of course, because that foreign participation has come down quite substantially, that's obviously meant that there's less disruption, or as much as less as what we've seen in the past. And then, of course, you have the BI coming in, supporting the currency consistently. That's also provided a buffer for the Indonesian rupiah. And of course, you have that ongoing slide in the dollar. And you've seen that there has been an outperformance of a lot of the Asian currencies, because not only because of the dollar has been sliding, but because also the yuan has been quite stable. And that's been really an anchor for the rest of the region.
So in a way, Indonesia and Thailand being buffered by the easing monetary cycle, that is expected to happen. The question really is that enough to lure, in fact, some of those investments, see those, inflows of capital?
For now, no. I think for now, investors are going to remain focused on what's happening on the political unrest, especially for Indonesia. And I think especially because you've seen the civil disruption become quite dangerous and quite concerning, not only for locals, but of course for investors as well. So I think that is how does it end? And that becomes, and the outlook becomes a lot more muddied there of how this unfolds. And so as long as we see any sort of political unrest, any sort of disruption, people taking it to the streets, that's going to have a real impact on assets there.
How about Thailand? If you take a longer-term view, would you be a buyer? Because, this is a country that has seen a rotation of prime ministers in a huge way. Two prime ministers have been kicked out in the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because even if you see at the performance of the Thai baht has been actually relatively stable given the unrest because of that fact, because we've seen a lot of political changes in Thailand over the course of the years. So you can argue and say that we're a lot more used to it as investors in terms of what's happening in Thailand. But it's really going to be on Indonesia this time around.
And of course, risk premium. Talk about risk premium.
Absolutely.
Right now. Mary, thank you so much for that. MLive market strategist Mary Nicola still to come on the show. Alibaba rallying hard this Monday after touting steady progress in AI. We'll have more details next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. Take a look at that. Alibaba leading gains in China's tech giants today after reporting a surge in AI revenue. The stock jumping as much as 19% for its biggest gain in almost 3 years. China's e-commerce leader reported a triple-digit percentage gain in AI revenue alongside better-than-expected sales in its cloud division. Alibaba's progress on AI helping to offset investor concerns over its price war with Meituan and JD.com in China's massive food delivery sector. And Alibaba's rally today helping China's biggest tech names extend their lead over their U.S. peers. As this chart shows, a grouping of tech giants, including Alibaba, Tencent and Xiaomi, is up by more than 50% over the past year, more than double the Nasdaq 100. Yet, even with that outperformance, forward valuations for the Chinese names are still much cheaper than those for the U.S. index. For more insights on these rival markets and the AI race, let's bring in Goldman Sachs Asset Management Portfolio Manager and co-head of Public Tech Investing, Sung Cho. Sung, good to have you with us. Always good to have you in the Lion City. So when you take a look at the AI play, given that China's AI players are much cheaper, valuations are way cheaper than the U.S., why wouldn't you be buying into China then try to keep on, racking up gains in the U.S.?
I think the rally certainly started in the U.S., but it has broadened out to areas like China because the applications around AI are really starting to expand. But let's not forget what's happening in the U.S. markets as well. The U.S. markets historically grew earnings at about 6 or 7% a year. And post-AI, since 2022, U.S. markets earnings EPS is growing at double digits. So we've grown from a market that's growing at 6 or 7% to now a market that's growing at 11 to 12%. And for the next 3 years, we think that earnings growth is once again going to be in the double digits. And so you've seen a little bit of an expansion in the absolute valuation in the U.S., but we think it's much more than justified.
The thing is, NVIDIA disappointed. Was it a surprise to you? I mean, expectations were sky high. It was kind of bound to disappoint.
Yeah, look, the stock's doubled in a very short period of time, so expectations had certainly gone a lot higher. But I think it was a very, very good result. And fundamentally, the question around NVIDIA is always what happens to the trajectory of CapEx from these levels, right? CapEx, remember at the beginning of the year, CapEx of the 4 major hyperscalers was expected to be around $280 billion. You know what that number is now? It's $360 billion. And so that's the single biggest KPI that's still impacting NVIDIA. And we think that models are going to get increasingly more competitive. Hyperscalers are chasing after artificial general intelligence. They're not happy with standing still right now. They understand that this is going to be the biggest technology pivot that we've seen in our lifetime, and they want to be the leaders. And that race is not slowing down. And until it does, NVIDIA is going to continue to be interesting.
The thing is, show me the money. If CapEx is so high, I want to see the returns. I'm not seeing the kind of returns that I should be seeing if I'm putting that much money.
Yeah. So you might start. So part of the reason why Alibaba has been so strong today is because they're actually starting to see the returns around AI as well. You're seeing a lot of consumer internet platforms
Not to the level that you're investing, though.
So one interesting stat that NVIDIA put out over the last couple of quarters is that if you look at training versus inference workloads, inference is actually the monetization piece. Training is actually the building of the models, right? We're now crossed over to the point where more than 50% of the workload is on inference relative to training. And so you're actually getting to the point where monetization is increasing. And we're optimistic as we look into 2026 with things like the development of AI agents, the continued monetization of consumer internet platforms like Meta, Netflix, and Spotify. The reason why these stocks have been so strong is because they're using AI and leveraging AI to actually drive higher levels of monetization. So there might not necessarily be visible forms of ROI to us right now because enterprise is just getting started, but it's well underway.
But you can understand why people are beginning to think about it being a bubble, right?
Yeah.
Because of the surge in the stock prices. I mean, you're optimistic about the future, but you have changed your mind before.
Yeah.
That DeepSeek moment did prompt you to reassess perhaps your position on NVIDIA.
Yeah.
What would cause you to rethink again?
Yeah, look, I think what would cause us to rethink, and first of all, we've been talking about an AI tech bubble for the last 10 years, right? 2015, it's a bubble. 2016, it's a bubble.
It's just a bigger bubble, though.
And by the way, the reason why is because we had to start such a sharp correction down that this rally up has been so powerful that people are saying, hey, we need to be cautious. But if you think about 2025 in isolation, the NASDAQ is up 12%. Over the last 10 years, the NASDAQ has averaged about a 16% return per year. So we're really back on track to where it has been, right? And if you told me at the start of the year that the single most important KPI for AI trade is AI CapEx, and AI CapEx has gone from 280 billion to 360 billion, and now the trajectory going forward is many people think that it's going to be more than the size of the U.S. Department of Defense spending, which is crazy to think about. Then you got to think that the trade continues to have legs.
So how do you play this? I mean, do you buy the dip?
Yeah, I mean, this is a period of digestion. So, like stocks, anytime
buy every dip.
You buy every dip. But so you have to think about what's happening, and you have to really go into the mindset of these people that are the companies that are spending this large amounts of capital. So if you think about what Meta is thinking, Meta is just hiring engineers for $100 million per engineer. Is that because they're going to stop spending on AI tomorrow? No, you have to think about what they're chasing after. And the big goal of what they're trying to chase after is AGI. And AGI is trying to unearth something beyond what humans are capable of today. So how do we cure cancer? How do we solve climate change? How do we solve, are there aliens in existence, right? There's things that human intelligence can't currently comprehend, and we're trying to move towards that AGI, and we're just cracking the surface on that, and I just don't see them slowing down in terms of that. So outside of any kind of big multi-standard deviation event where we lead to a big correction, I just think that the medium to long-term trajectory of spend is upward, not downward. And so for those reasons, I'd probably be buying a lot of the dips.
I'm a little bit nervous because I think there are risks there, and I guess risks are being underpriced right now. How do you hedge? I mean, just in case you're wrong.
Yeah. So look, I think you have to think about it and one of the things about Goldman is what we try to pride ourselves on is trying to be humble. And anytime the fact pattern changes, we're going to change our opinion as well, right? At least the investing culture is that way. And so, we're going to continue to look for signposts that maybe we are wrong on this.
Including like what? What signposting?
So basically, anytime that we think there's indicators that the CapEx trajectory is slowing. Think about it. That's the most important KPI right now in the whole AI CapEx trade. And so what we're going to look for is any indication that that's slowing down.
So great perspective. Do come back again. Sung Cho, Portfolio Manager and Co-Head of Public Tech Investing at Goldman Sachs Asset Management. Coming up, Chinese President Xi Jinping urges allies to oppose any Cold War mentality as the CSO summit gets underway in Tianjin. We're live from the event next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.
We should seek common ground while putting aside differences. Shared aspirations are the source of strength and advantage, and the will to seek commonality while shelving differences reflects wisdom and vision.
Chinese President Xi Jinping speaking at the CSO summit in Tianjin. Our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Angle, is at the event and joins us now. Steve, it is a much anticipated speech given the political dynamics in the world today. What was President Xi's key message when he addressed the summit in the last hour?
Well, essentially that if they work together, they can share in prosperity and in peace. So that's broad brushstrokes, no doubt. But he's banking a lot on the building out of the SCO as a regional bloc of strategic alliances. Yes, it's just 10 members, with Belarus being the more recent addition as a full-time member, but there are 26 in total, including partners and observers. And, you have, for the first time in many years, essentially up on the same podium, the presidents of China, of Russia, of India, of Pakistan, and of Iran. So that in itself is a regional bloc of quite significant magnitude. And no doubt that this SCO in particular, being held in China, will be more prominent. It will be the largest. It is the largest probably since it was founded in 2001. But again, one of our guests in the previous hour talked about it's no doubt going to be more prominent. Will it be more relevant? That's the good question. As a counterweight, if you will, to the U.S.-led world order. Now, for me, the biggest interesting point is that man there you see on your screen, Narendra Modi, and China's courting of détente with India. Surely over the last 5 years, there's been differences between New Delhi and Beijing, highlighted, well, lowlighted, if you will, by the border skirmishes in 2020, to the point now where there is a chance of an opening given Washington's 50% tariff on Indian goods going to the United States, something that was probably surprised New Delhi quite a bit. So Beijing sees an opportunity to bring India into the fold, if you will. But again, keep in mind, India has a long-standing strategy of not necessarily taking sides. They have the policy of strategic autonomy. Yes, they're part of BRICS. Yes, they're also part of the Quad security arrangement, but they also want to remain neutral in many ways to maintain their flexibility.
And of course, that's come to the fore. You talked about Indian Prime Minister Modi, President Xi. We know both men met over the weekend. What transpired? What was achieved?
Yeah, so Modi announced that they're going to resume direct flights. I mentioned about the difficulties over the last 5 years. So the main, at least, news point that came out late yesterday was that they're going to be resuming flights. Indigo Airlines says already that they're willing to start up flights. Air India also likely involved. Also, before the flights that were disrupted, we had the three main airlines, Air China, China Southern, and China Eastern, also flying direct routes to India. So those will likely resume as well. Going forward, we also, of course, have Vladimir Putin here. Putin and Xi have that no-limits partnership. How much is that going to be expanded? Will Vladimir Putin be able to convince the Chinese to purchase more energy from Russia? Of course, there's the long-shelved second gas pipeline called the Power of Siberia 2, which China has been reluctant to pony up the money to build out. That one, could that possibly be something that could be moved forward? It's pie in the sky right now. I think a lot of the headlines that we're going to get is just about this Tianjin initiative that will be released later today. We're getting bits and pieces of a preliminary draft that's going to be highlighting a lot about the security in the region across Central Asia and, of course, the terrorist attacks in Gaza, as well as the terrorist attacks back in April in Jammu, Kashmir. So we're waiting to get the details on that. That's probably the biggest news-making event coming later today.
Steve, thank you so much for that. Our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Angle, on the ground in Tianjin. Let's get further perspective on the CSO summit with Ashok Kantha, former Indian ambassador to China. He's currently honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies. Ambassador, good to have you with us. We know that this is Prime Minister Modi's first trip to China in 7 years, meeting Xi Jinping in person. Do you see this as diplomatic hedge or a counterweight? How are you assessing this visit?
Well, I don't see it either as diplomatic hedge or counterweight. What we are doing, after an extended period of downturn in relations, for reasons you are aware of, since October last year, when Prime Minister Modi met with President Xi, we are trying to rebuild India-China relations. And that process has been taken forward yesterday when the two leaders met. I think there is desire to sort of step up what we call people-centric contacts and also economic engagement. Prime Minister made it very clear that we will pursue strategic autonomy, and we are not looking at India-China relations through prism of a third country. And that was an important message, essentially allaying certain perceptions that India is trying to move closer to China to compensate for certain difficulties we have with the USA at this point of time. Our relations with the USA are extremely important, notwithstanding current turbulence which we are witnessing. And we are not interested in sort of being a counterweight or joining up with China, Russia, or SCO to counter USA. Likewise, when Steve referred to developing SCO as a bloc, that has not been India's policy. We believe that the SCO was conceived initially as a platform for combating terrorism, and it has acquired a digital agenda. So it can play an important role. And today, we are faced with terrorism. We hope there will be forceful message coming out of SEO outcome document later today.
Right.
But we would like, SEO to remain a platform for functional cooperation rather than becoming a geopolitical instrument.
So, fairer to describe India's foreign policy as being anchored in diversification?
Yes, I mean, that has been our policy. We follow, strategic autonomy. We follow, multi-alignment. We believe, we can have good relations with all major countries and Global South at the same time. Today, given our difficulties on the US account, clearly there is greater incentive to explore options, particularly in terms of expansion of trade and investment links. And China being the second largest economy in the world, it's an option we are exploring. So one message which came across clearly is that we are trying to resurrect a developmental partnership with China. It's not going to be easy because there are all kinds of difficulty in the relationship, but we are trying to move in that direction.
We heard from my colleague Steve earlier about the initiatives announced over the weekend, the resumption of flights, the easing of export controls. Are these concrete? Are these meaningful, or are they symbolic? Because they will be difficult to implement for some of them at least.
Well, as far as direct flights are concerned, that understanding was reached earlier this year. We have technical talks going on. In fact, we had a visit of a delegation to Beijing just a few days ago to work out modalities, including an updated air services agreement. We hope that will happen soon. That's something we need. Also, in terms of liberalization of visa, in terms of greater trade investment flows, I think those are objectives India would like to pursue, while at the same time mindful of challenges. Particularly need to ensure economic security, because recently we saw how China is seeking to weaponize India's dependencies on imports from China, certain products. That's not limited to India, that they have done with other partner countries as well. So I'm sure our leadership will keep that in mind while moving ahead. So it will be a process of calibrated, step-by-step improvement of relations. And at the same time, I think we are very clear that border areas must remain peaceful. That is essential for continued normalization of relations. And also, we would like to see some progress towards boundary settlement. And when the Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in India 2 weeks ago, I think that matter received a lot of attention. Some new understandings have been reached. They need to be followed through now.
Some of these lingering issues, like China's military relations with Pakistan, might they, I guess, limit India's engagement with China?
Yes, they will. Though, Prime Minister told President Xi that we are partners rather than rivals. But the fact remains that the areas where we have serious concerns about China's policies. For instance, during recent 4-day hostilities we had with Pakistan in May, China provided very significant operational support to Pakistan, apart from advanced Chinese weapon systems being deployed in combat situation for the first time against India. There are other issues, including this massive, hydropower project, which is coming up in India's immediate vicinity, which will be 3 times the size of Three Gorges project, presently largest in the world. And there are several other issues which will be taken into account while developing this, process of rebuilding relations. So we are rebuilding relations. I don't think we are anywhere close to reset in India-China ties.
India and China are among the biggest economies in the world, growing in excess of, 5% for China and much higher for India. How might they reshape global trade?
This is one matter which was discussed yesterday, that how can we work together to impart greater stability to global trade. China is one of our largest trading partners, but problem is that we have a huge trade deficit with China, and this is something which was flagged by Prime Minister Modi with President Xi yesterday. We would like WTO to become a more effective platform. As you know, it has not been functioning well for a variety of reasons. But what we can achieve between India and China, frankly, is somewhat limited because there are very serious structural problems today in the way multilateral institutions are working. Many of them are in fact comatose. So bringing them back to life is not going to be easy at all, especially when USA is trying to sort of move away from its global commitments, and Europe also is preoccupied with a whole lot of issues.
So given the unreliability of the U.S. in this case, might Asian countries now lean towards each other as a strategy? Do you see that happening?
You would have noticed that before going to Tianjin, Prime Minister had gone to Japan, and it was a very substantive visit. It's a relationship we have tried to develop for quite some time. So we will definitely, try to develop these major relationships as also engagement with the global South. But I would like to underline that for India, USA remains an essential partner. It's a critical relationship. We are quite unhappy at present with kind of negative signals we are receiving from Trump administration, both President Trump personally and some of his senior advisors. They have caused a lot of heartburn in India, no doubt about it. But we are taking a longer-term view. We would like to address those issues, and clearly we don't see answer. Yeah. No, we don't see answer to the problem. Yeah, sure. I'm just last point.
We thank you so much for your insights, Ambassador.
Yeah,
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Ashok Kantha, former Indian ambassador to China. Now, before we go, here's a look at our show tomorrow. We'll continue keeping an eye on the latest developments in Indonesia and Thailand with Bauer Group Asia's Nadia Niao. That is it for Insight. Horizons Middle East and Africa is next. This is Bloomberg.